Hi, my name is Dr. Sandra Newist, also known as Sandy Newist. I am part of the Living Medicine Institute and the Psychedelic Provider Network. I also work at Concierge Medicine and Psychiatry, where we do ketamine assisted psychotherapy in Asheville, North Carolina. I wanted to do this video just to simply debunk some myths about ketamine assisted psychotherapy. There was a recent article in the New York Times that really brought a lot of concerns, and we honestly share a lot of those concerns. So I wanted to kind of go over what some of those myths are, and also to just kind of debunk or give a more professional view, a more wide angle lens about it. First of all, is the number one is that there are adverse medical effects. And specifically, there's been lots of concerns that ketamine can cause bladder issues. And that I just wanted to kind of speak to that. One, we have absolutely no evidence that there has been any concerns with bladder issues ever seen in our clinic. When ketamine is medically supervised, when it's medically administered, and or if it's combined with ketamine assisted psychotherapy. What that really is that comes from the recreational use, especially in the UK. They've been tracking it pretty carefully, and it's certainly growing in the United States. Also, we believe that with the opening of telemedicine, that people have much more access to ketamine. It provides much more opportunity for abuse. So that's really associated with high use, abuse of high doses administered over extended periods of time. At that point, yeah, there probably are bladder issues. But what we see is that there are no adverse medical effects. We monitor for blood pressure. We look for certain medication interactions, but mostly there really are no adverse medical effects except in those occasions where it's being abused, and we don't support that. The next one is ketamine is addictive. I would say yes. And here again, under medically supervised conditions where the ketamine is either administered in a clinic with a licensed provider or licensed therapist, or it's done through home use and it is carefully monitored, clients are carefully monitored, and people are given a limited amount of access to have in their possession. At that point, I think we are really minimizing the potential impact of addiction. However, certainly that is true, right? Tolerance builds up. People begin to have cravings. I call it preoccupation. People can get really preoccupied with it. I think that is more common with certain routes of administration. Nasal spray is one that is increasingly widely available, but it's real easy to just take a little puff or two before you go out. And I think that can lead to preoccupation. And so I think we need to monitor that closely. So certainly, all right, we really do see addiction potential. It can be addictive. People are using it. People are abusing it. But what I really want to make a really important point here is that recreational use of ketamine and therapeutic use of ketamine, and by therapeutic, I don't mean that first couple of times that somebody uses it and they have these aha moments and then they go on to overuse in search of that. That is abuse. Okay. But therapeutic use of ketamine, where you will go in to use the treatment in an intentional way to address underlying therapeutic issues, and ideally with a trained therapist who's helping you move towards your clinical goals, that they are meat and fruit, right? It's not the same thing. So very, very different. You can eat them both, but meat and fruit are very different. Therapeutic use of ketamine and recreational use of ketamine, very, very different. Also want to point out what it said in the New York Times article, that certainly some people are hoarding it. They're saving it up. They're using it in a way that is not prescribed. They're not informing their prescribers about what it is that is actually happening for them. Agreed. All right. All of that is of concern. And I think it really warrants that we take a really close look at what's happening with this and really look at elevating the professionalism in the field. We are 100% for that. The next myth is, what about the K-hole? If I use ketamine, am I going to go into the K-hole? Okay, so let's start with what that is. That really comes from the concept of a bad trip, and it comes out of recreational settings. In ketamine assisted psychotherapy settings or ketamine treatment settings, we sometimes actually want clients to go to that, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay. But the K-hole in a recreational setting is when somebody is at a party or on a dance floor, they do ketamine and they take more than they had planned for, or they haven't done it before, and the effects are not what they intended. Okay. This can be terrifying. right? It really does take you into a different reality because ketamine is a very powerful psychedelic. If you don't go into that with intention and it catches you off guard and that is not your plan and you do not have support in order to deal with that, it can certainly be terrifying. Now, in therapeutic settings, okay, in a clinic with a therapist, we might use higher dose ketamine administered through IV or IM very specifically to actually bring that on for some clients when it's deemed to be clinically appropriate. And what we mean by that is something really common in the psychedelic literature, what we call ego dissolution, right? Or ego death, where one really loses one's sense of self. We believe that in some cases, that can be really important to increase to give them a different perspective of themselves, to change their set point, to bring them into an alternate reality in order to affect change. Okay, so there are times when we actually want that, but you're not going to want that at a party. You don't want that on the dance floor. So sometimes we do, in fact, bring people to the K-hole, but for very specific therapeutic intent and purpose. Okay, here again, this really highlights the importance, if you are to seek ketamine treatment, to work with a really well-trained prescriber, because that is also a dosing issue. Okay, sometimes we work with people in our clinic at lower doses, more kind of down into the lower range, where we're simply trying to allow some of the defenses to loosen so material can come up. Right? That's the skill of the prescriber. But sometimes we really do want that psychedelic range. Here again, that's the skill of the prescriber. And if you're working with a therapist, in collaboration with the therapist, so that that is done intentionally and the client is well prepared, and we're focused on how to integrate that back into their life after that occurs. The fourth myth, ketamine is not a psychedelic as other psychedelics, or it's not a real psychedelic. Associated with that is it's not natural. It's not a plant. Well, it is true. Ketamine is not a plant, and it is, in fact, a chemical. What is not true is that it's not a psychedelic. Okay? Ketamine is a short-acting, very intense psychedelic, or it can be very intense, again, depending on the dosage. Okay? It's more inward focused as opposed to externally focused, like some of the other psychedelics. We have many clients who come to our clinic and many trainees who come through our training program who actually hold these views, and it's just simply false. In fact, ketamine is a powerful psychedelic, and if you do more than one treatment, there can be real distinct advantages to the short-acting nature of it. You're under the influence for approximately an hour. Okay? If you're doing, depending on the route of administration, again, IV or IM specifically, right? And those can be spread out over time. And with that spreading out over time, we're hoping to actually extend the gains. The fifth myth is that ketamine is not good for trauma. Other psychedelics are better. Okay. So while it is true that there's outstanding use of data on the use of MDMA for working with PTSD and trauma, right? That is awesome. Like, that is excellent for all of us in this field, and it stands alone. Finding something that can be so effective for working with people who have these really difficult to treat issues is amazing. And we also believe that ketamine can be very effective. We see clients consistently in our clinic who are struggling with a range of trauma, either specific traumatic events that have occurred, relational trauma, or developmental trauma. So we work with that all the time, and we find it to be very effective, particularly when combined with skilled clinical interventions that are effective at working with trauma and associated adverse effect. So if you want to do trauma work with ketamine, or you're interested in that, we suggest that you find a therapist or a clinic that has that particular skill set so that you can get guided in that particular way to work with those particular clinical goals. The last one is that the effects are short acting and they don't last. Now, ketamine comes out of a place in which it was actually found to have a short-term remission of really significant treatment-resistant depression. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then the symptoms will come back. What we are trying to do with ketamine assisted psychotherapy is that we are actually trying to extend the benefits. We're trying to build clinical models that allow us to actually extend the benefits. So to use the ketamine as part of a clinical process as opposed to a standalone intervention. And we believe that we are extending the benefits by doing that. The use of ketamine for mental health is relatively new, right? It's being increasingly widely spread use, different routes of administration. Okay, some people are getting access to it really freely. Others, it's being done in medically supervised clinics. We are really against the uncontrolled and non-medically supervised use of ketamine and recognize the potential for risk and the potential for damage. We also consider this risk to be mitigated when ketamine is administered under medically supervised conditions and by well-trained medical and clinical professionals who are familiar with the medicine and its positive effects and the potentially adverse effect. Again, skill with dosing is a critical part of this. It's not a one-size-fits-all formula. It's really important that your prescriber really know how to get that dose right for each individual person. That risk is further mitigated when you work with a trained therapist who helps guide clients towards treatment goals using established clinical techniques and building on a well-established therapeutic relationship and a solid clinical process. So our goal is to really focus on extending the benefits, deepening the therapeutic process, improving client outcomes, and also to focus on harm reduction through training and education. So take home message, work with a trained provider, get training yourself and educate yourself and keep an open mind. Thank you so much.